Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Spiritual Christianity Explained. My name is David Higgins, and today I am going to share with you Swedenborg's take on the Divine Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. This is the central theological concept of Christianity, and it is of the utmost importance. So we're going to endeavor to wrap our heads around it. Of course, I've explained in previous episodes that Swedenborg maintains that the Bible has an internal meaning. That is to say that it is a spiritual parable, that the Bible uses natural ideas and concepts and images to convey spiritual truths. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are natural terms which express spiritual ideas, and so we are going to learn how to understand that, and then we're going to see how Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are moving in the gospel narrative and see what we can learn from that. So I have some visual aids for you. I'm going to pull the camera forward and we're going to start breaking this thing down. Looks to me like I'm properly framed. So we have Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Swedenborg starts out with a natural metaphor because the first thing he wants us to be very careful about is to understand that Father, Son, and Holy Spirit is not meant to convey the idea of three separate persons of God, which is the traditional interpretation that has come down to us through the ages. But Swedenborg says that it's irrational to think of three persons of God being one God. And he explains that within Jesus Christ is the Trinity. And in the same manner, metaphorically speaking, we can compare it to the Trinity that's in each of us. Each of us has a soul, a body, and our actions. And those three things are the essentials of each of us as an individual. And within Jesus Christ, the same Trinity can be said to exist. That is basically a natural metaphor. And see, with Swedenborg, he does in fact discuss spiritual truths using natural terminology. The important thing is to recognize the difference between natural terminology and spiritual terminology. So I'm going to set this thing aside. I'll bring it back in a minute after we draw some careful distinctions about the difference between natural terminology and spiritual terminology. Natural terminology is characterized by being framed in the concepts of time and space. Any reference to person, external objects, places, and history, these are all external natural concepts. The spiritual level is an abstract level. Swedenborg uses the word spirit to mean the mind. Instead of time and space, we have the parameters of truth and goodness. Time relates to truth, and space represents goodness. Spiritual things in Swedenborgian use is mental and emotional things. So whenever he talks about the spirit, he's referring to the mind, and the mind has two components, the will and the intellect. The will is the receptacle of love, and the intellect is the receptacle of wisdom. Whenever we're approaching a spiritual parable, we need to always recognize that the natural image needs to be separated from the spiritual concept in order to maintain clarity. I'm going to put my previous sign back up, and we're going to see how Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, abstracted from the natural level, refers to love, wisdom, and use. Love is the essence of God, wisdom is the manifestation of God, and use is his love and wisdom going forth in creation. Remember on the previous sign I said the mind was composed of the will and the intellect. The will receives love, the intellect receives wisdom, and then the usefulness that results when the will and the intellect work together is usefulness. So you can see how Father, Son, and Holy Spirit soul, body, and actions all basically relate to time and space realities, but love, wisdom, and use relate to internal mental qualities. It's important to draw the distinction between natural terminology and spiritual terminology. But now the important thing to realize about natural terminology is that they really are the foundation of our ability to conceive of things. We're born into the natural world. Infants basically have no mental content, and through their life in the world and contact with external realities and experience, their minds begin to develop. And those lower level sensual physical experiences form the basis of their developing mental levels. Somewhere in our late teens and early 20s, our rationality begins to develop, and through our natural experiences which form the foundation of our mental life, we're able to develop the spiritual level of our mind. We start out totally immersed in natural type thought, but then as we recognize that this other higher level of ideal goodness and truth exists, we recognize the meaning within our external natural experiences, and through that we become able to appreciate this inner spiritual level. So now I'm going to reveal the last bit here. So having established that the gospel is a spiritual parable, we can learn something about our spirit, which is our mind, if we look within the natural narrative that's presented to us in the Gospels and replace each of the natural images and objects with its spiritual analog. So the basic symbolic elements of the Gospel are the setting, which is the land of Israel, the main actor, who is Jesus, and then of course you have the events that are written in the Gospels. So starting with the land of Israel, a natural image of a place. In Swedenborg's semantic, whenever we are reading about a place, it actually represents, in general, the human mind. So there are many different places mentioned in the Bible, and each place has its own unique significance, but they're all essentially mental states. So Swedenborg has an extensive breakdown of the structure of the human mind. And so each of these different places that are mentioned in the Bible relate to different places in the human mind. But in general, the land of Israel, which is the setting of the Gospels, represents our mind. And Jesus represents truth. So when we think about Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, remember we're going to talk about love, wisdom, and use, or goodness, truth, and then the activities that result of both of them. So goodness and truth are actually one. There's an essential unity of goodness and truth, but we can separate them with our mind, even though they're really one, much like a person's body and soul are one, and the essence and the manifestation of God are one, but we can separate them into parts so that we can gain a rational understanding of the thing. So when we look at the Father and the Son in the gospel narratives, there appears to be a separation, and at times there appears to be a unity between them. And that is because in it representing our spiritual state, at times what we believe to be true isn't actually good. And so it's sort of a mistaken concept. But when our understanding is united to goodness, then Father and Son are said to be one. So now, Jesus moving in the land of Israel is a spiritual presentation of the manner in which truth affects our human mind. And then the plot represents our spiritual journey. So if we just give a real quick synopsis of the life of Jesus in the Gospels, he's born, of course, as a helpless infant in a manger in Bethlehem to Mary the Virgin, and then the next view of him we have is when he's about 12 and he's speaking with the rulers of the temple in Jerusalem, and then we see him next as an adult where he has his ministry and he performs miracles and heals people. And then ultimately, of course, we know that he is crucified and then he is resurrected from the dead and ascends to heaven. So this represents the way in which truth moves in our mind during our spiritual journey. So it's really important to recognize that the only way to really make sense of the gospel narrative is to read it as a spiritual parable, because there are many strange contradictions, it seems, within the gospel narrative, and even within Swedenborg's The Doctrine of the Lord. In Swedenborg, he at times speaks to us of abstract goodness and truth, and at times he speaks to us about historical Jesus. He'll discuss the temptations that Jesus endured. So whenever he is speaking about historical Jesus, we need to recognize that that is a natural image. And if we're going to understand the spiritual truth within that natural image, we need to replace references to Jesus with the concept of truth. That's really key to properly understanding and making sense of Swedenborg. So I hope that you can keep that in mind. It's important to read the Doctrine of the Lord, because what is presented in the Doctrine of the Lord that Swedenborg published is basically an accurate rendering of the historical aspect of the advent of Jesus. And you have to have the proper sequence of events to then look deeper, because if you have the wrong sequence of events or the wrong basic understanding of the plot, then you can easily fall into some serious confusion. So I will be, of course, looking into that much more so in coming episodes. It's a deep and important subject. Swedenborg goes so far as to say that a person's place in heaven is according to their understanding of the Lord. Now, when he says your place in heaven, it's also very important to remember that he very carefully says that heaven is not a place. He says heaven is a state of mind where goodness and truth are united within us. So heaven and hell are both states of mind. So that really needs to be carefully remembered. So Swedenborg, of course, has the book called Heaven and Hell, and he describes the place of heaven and all of the people of heaven, which are angels, and the people of hell, which are devils. And he says that this is what we should expect in the world beyond the grave. And so there's different ways that we can understand this. And I believe the most significant way for us while we're living in this life is to be cognizant of the fact that much of what Swedenborg is expressing to us is using natural terminology to convey spiritual truths. So, in any case, I hope this helps you on your spiritual journey, and I hope that you'll take the time to join me again for future episodes of Spiritual Christianity Explained. So, go in peace.